Welcome to Trifecta Collective, Finding the Root with Megan and Shannon, the podcast, where we dive deep into all things health and wellness to help you find health and healing inside and out for now and forever.
Hello and welcome to Trifecta Collective, Finding the Root with Megan and Shannon. I am Megan Abbott, owner and founder of the holistic health practice Trifecta Collective. And this is my co-host and head practitioner, Shannon Callery. Oh, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, I'm, as always, super excited for today's just because we're going to be talking about some very, very, very common things that get overlooked super regularly.
Yeah, and we both have experiences with this. I was diagnosed at one point with an autoimmune condition, and at one point I also had just serious chronic pain issues that no one could figure out. And they're like, all right, well, here's opioids. This is your only option left. And I was like, you should probably talk to me about my family history a little bit more before even thinking about prescribing me something that's super addictive. Just with my family history of addiction, it runs super rampant in my family. Don't do that. So yeah, we're going to talk about chronic illness in kind of a perspective of invisible illnesses. And we're going to go through several that maybe not necessarily invisible. Some of them are definitely invisible illnesses, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome. Some of them have symptoms associated with them. But Western medicine often does not do a great job, and they are more often kind of blanket diagnoses. Or, we are going to talk about autoimmunity a bit today too. And obviously there are tests for autoimmune conditions. There's also thousands of autoimmune conditions. So many of them go undiagnosed and undiagnosed for many, many, many years for many of us. We're just going to dive a little bit deeper into, okay, when you get diagnosed with this, what is really going on? Why are these things happening? Testing that'll often come up, testing that we do, how we address, and what the root causes are of a lot of these things that we see in our practice, and how to actually heal and dive deeper into these so that you're not stuck with this blanket, I don't really know what's going on for Western medicine kind of situation going on. And, everything that we talk about today, we fully believe that you can heal from them. For many people, you can have a complete reversal or remission, kind of depending on the language you like to use. And we'll talk more about that. It's not 100% of the time in all cases, but it is for many, many of these. And we'll dive into all of that too.
Yeah. And, just like anything else that we've talked about, you can definitely go into flare-ups for certain situations and whatnot. But the majority of these things that we're going to talk about are there's definitely root cause issues for them that are just overlooked. I'm going to go ahead and dive into the first one because I think it's one of the most common things that, I've been through it. I'm sure, Megan, you got one of these diagnoses at some point, and almost every person that I talk to has been told that they have this before. And we're talking about IBS or IBD. This is just the most blanket diagnosis when really they can't figure out what's going on. So it's there's bloating, acid reflux, maybe you're having bowel issues, going back and forth between constipation, diarrhea, plenty of GI symptoms go with this. Maybe eating certain foods, but you can't pinpoint what certain food is causing the issue. I feel like that's a really big one that they tie in with this. And typically the type of testing that they're going to do, and I've seen it go both ways. Some people do just get a prescription recommendation for this. And then there's the other side of things, which this is what I went through, is going through colonoscopy. Sometimes they'll do an endoscopy. But what's happening is nothing specific is coming back on these tests. And I want to put this out there too, because I'm not against this type of testing. I think it's great for screenings. We have colon cancer. They're looking for polyps and all the things. So in my head, I feel like that's why they lean towards this type of testing, is they want to make sure none of those really big things are there. But again, like most of these people, general population who's just struggling with this stuff, they're just coming back and they're saying, oh, your gut's like really inflamed. Mine was, I will never get over what they told me after I did a colonoscopy when I was 16 years old. The GI doctor came back and told me that you have a really petite and small, like internal frame. So your intestines and everything are like kind of smushed together. I almost lost it when he told me that that was the reasoning behind why I had so many issues. I mean, even my mom, who like wasn't super into this side of things, I think she even chuckled at that a little bit because she was like, are you joking? Like, this is not a reason behind all of this. So yeah, that's some of the basic testing that they're going to do for this. But the problem is like your gut's inflamed and they're not doing the further digging to help you figure out why it's inflamed. And that's kind of where we come in with our side of things and just being able to look at basic blood work. Like a really common thing that we're going to look at for this is a CBC with differential, because that's going to give us that snapshot of, hey, what's going on in the gut? Can we see some parasite patterns? Can we see some bacterial stuff? Do we have some viral patterns showing up? We can actually see that through this blood work, and that's going to help us get to that root issue behind the GI upset and the inflammation in your gut.
Exactly. And, if you're really lucky, you might get a SIBO diagnosis. If you're really lucky, which go back and listen to our SIBO episode, because SIBO is a symptom. It is not a root cause. And if you take the medication, or if you decide to go the herbal route, if you do the low FODMAP diet, like that's going to be one of their recommendations, is to follow the low FODMAP diet. And they're going to be like, well, this is a forever type of thing, which absolutely not. You should not have to be on that kind of restrictive diet for more than even like 1 to 2 months. It's a really long time, let alone the rest of your life. Absolutely not. So if you're really lucky, you'll get a SIBO diagnosis, and you might get a prescription for something to kill the SIBO. And then you'll also get the recommendation to go on a low FODMAP diet. And it might help your symptoms, and it's going to come back for sure. We both have had SIBO so many times. We see this in so many cases with clients that we work with, of just these chronic SIBO issues, these chronic gut issues, and going off and on the low FODMAP diet, because it's not fun to be on this diet. Avoiding garlic and onions, let alone anything else on the list, is a nightmare.
So it's so difficult to do.
Yeah, like you can't eat out anywhere. Almost everything has garlic and onions in it, and you're gonna react. So, most people, they're just going to be like, all right, well, your gut's inflamed. Like, good luck. Go on a FODMAP diet. We'll see if that helps. See ya. So, and we just need to dig deeper. Oftentimes, we're dealing with toxin overload issues that resulted in a variety of gut issues that usually started up higher and kind of worked its way down. Parasite overgrowth, super, super common with either one. We definitely want to rule that in or out. And here's the thing, they're doing these testings, and I'm all for these tests too. Just by the way, I do not think they are bad. I think they're great for preventative measures and ruling out anything super serious. And they have a lot of limitations, as does most Western medicine. And, when we talk about these bigger root causes and looking at lab work and blood work, once again, we have to understand, if you haven't listened to our blood work episodes, they're not trained to look for these things, because they're trained to do this test. You have these symptoms. This is the prescription. And if there's no prescription that they can give you, they got really nothing for you most of the time. And which is a huge mistake. I'll even go as far as, if you then go to something like a naturopathic doctor, not saying all of them are like this, but I've never met a good one out of the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people we've worked with, and the one that I saw. So, they might do some leaky gut work for you, and they might do a stool test, in which case, guess what? Bacteria will probably show up, some bacterial imbalances, some sort of immune response. They might do a food sensitivity test. Maybe, maybe not. Things come up for that. They're going to try to remove that for either 30 to 90 days, depending on who you talk to, which all of that is a mistake, in our opinion. So,
Or a waste of time.
Yeah. Exactly.
I mean, it's a waste of time and a waste of money just because, again, we know that there's something bigger going on underneath it. And that's the piece that we need to look for. And we truthfully do the absolute best that we can to make sure people are not just like wasting money on testing, not putting themselves in bad patterns. Like with the restrictive diets, like, yeah, I have seen them help certain people for a certain amount of time, but the 90% of the people who do them get stuck on them. They rely it creates some sort of disordered eating pattern that has to do with like fear of getting off of them. There's just the benefits don't outweigh the actual diet, in our opinion.
Yeah. And once again, like going gluten-free for a little bit to see if you react to gluten. Same thing with dairy. These are really common things that they're ultra processed by and large. Conventional dairy, conventional kind of gluten, we think of like white bread, the ultimate like processed gluten filled, and our bodies cannot process these kinds of things very well. There is value in that, and also in understanding how our body works, and they can go horribly wrong. And, once again, I'm not saying we never put people, recommend going gluten-free or dairy-free for a period of time and then reintroducing it. Yeah, absolutely. That is the case at times, but it's never let's go full-blown low histamine. Let's go full-blown low FODMAP for months and months and months at a time. Yeah. Here's the other thing you need to understand about low FODMAP. If you are doing that by itself for SIBO, you are just starving the bacteria for a certain amount of time. They're going to go into hiding. And as soon as you reintroduce those foods, guess who reappears and comes out of their little biofilm shells? The same bacteria, and you're going to react again within usually a few days, if not a few weeks. And that's what we're trying to avoid, is you shouldn't have to do these diets, restrictive diets long term, if you address the why and the how that these things happen in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. And there's so much more to this with any of these, like when we're talking about the diet and whatnot, and like even the medications that they add on. Like we have to understand too, I understand that, medications are good for certain things, for certain people, maybe a short time frame, like whatever that may be. It looks very different for everyone. But when we start adding multiple things on, for instance, like, a lot of people who struggle with like IBS or IBD have some skin issues, maybe some acne showing up. Like I said, maybe they're having constipation issues. So we start adding in like Miralax is a really big one in the Western medicine community for that. There's also other prescription medications for constipation. Then maybe we're adding in something for acne, like Accutane or something. And we have to think about the fact that our body is already not in that great of a position. It's already super inflamed, has some sort of imbalance going on. And then we're consistently taking these other things to try and manage it, not realizing that it's really hard on our liver when we take that stuff for a long time. So it's just like where I was going with that is that the root issue is just super, super important. And I do think that people are starting to realize it, though, because I have this conversation quite often, even with family and friends. And I think it's starting to click in people's head that there's something else beneath it, that they don't know what it actually is.
Yes, I would totally agree. And that's, a lot of people come to us be like, I know something bigger is going on and I just don't know what. And not accepting these diagnoses as the be-all, end-all of, well, I have IBS. This is my life. I'm going on these meds every 6 months because the SIBO's coming back and I'm always on a low FODMAP diet. And if I'm not, then I've got, the pain, the gas, and the bloating, and, the bowel movement issues, like all of that's coming back. And you just deal with it, which you don't have to. You don't have to live miserably with any of these things. It's got to be a big, like, moral of this whole episode of there's something else going on, and there are ways to heal. It's just a matter of what is the right way for you. And that it should not include long-term restrictive dieting. It should not have to include, for many people, medications that are really Band-Aids, like the SIBO meds that are out there. There's a handful of those out there. Having to go on those every 6 months, like, that's no way to live. And Western medicine is just limited in their knowledge and their ability to help, because that's not what they're designed to do. Western medicine is not designed to figure out and address big root causes.
Yes. Yeah. Very well said. The other one I want to throw in there too is the antibiotics. I mean, sometimes they're telling people to stay on antibiotics I literally met with someone the other day who was on antibiotics for like a year straight. And I'm like, okay, there's so many things to this. That is very, very, very difficult on your body. You're wiping out not only the bad stuff, but all the good stuff. And they're not telling you to put any of the good stuff back in, which is a whole other issue. So the medication piece, again, like we said, this whole episode is going to be about there's something beneath this, and you don't have to live that way. And you certainly should not be taking antibiotics for a year long.
Gosh, no, absolutely. Absolutely not. Just because this happened to me, and I've seen this so many, it's like prednisone, like having to be on prednisone for months, for years at a time. Absolutely, that should not be the case. It's so detrimental for the body long term. And most medications, just by the way, were not meant to be taken long term. Most of them are like, take for 14 to 30 days at most. If we even look at PPIs, most of those were meant to be taken for weeks to a month at a time, not years at a time, because there are really big long-term impacts, and Western medicine just doesn't have other answers to fix and address other than these medications. And once again, I think Western medicine's great. It has time, it has a place, and when it comes to most of these chronic issues, they're not going to do a great job.
Yeah. And I think everything that we talked about too, those are good red flags for people to look out for. Like, if you are someone who's been on antibiotics for 3 to 6 months now, I hope you're listening, because this is a good red flag to be like, okay, maybe I need to do some other stuff in addition to that. So hopefully people find this helpful for that reason alone. I think that pretty much sums it up for the IBS portion of it. So the next really, really big one that we also hear quite often is chronic fatigue syndrome. So there's no specific test for this either. They're certainly going to look at different inflammation markers and whatnot. And we also look at inflammation through blood work when someone's coming in. And of course, when we have some sort of root issue going on, whether that's, like a bacterial thing, a parasite thing, maybe it's mold, there's going to be inflammation in the body. But pretty much how they diagnose this is that when you've had chronic fatigue syndrome, if you've been extremely fatigued for 6 months or longer, that's when they're going to start to maybe use this diagnosis in that area. And this is really, really common, I will say, with viral issues. Like if you've had Epstein-Barr virus before, even Lyme is not a virus, but I'll say this goes for Lyme disease as well. Any sort of infection, viral issue in the body, it's not uncommon to experience that chronic fatigue when you have something like a bigger root issue going on in the body.
Exactly. And if we think of how the body really works here, and if we look from a cellular perspective, which is what most blood work is really looking at, we're looking at cellular health. We're also, a big piece of this is mitochondrial health. And that mitochondria is the energy powerhouses of our cells. And if we have nutrient deficiencies, if we have toxin overload issues, if we have gut overgrowth issues, chronic infection issues, if our body's just in a constant state of fight or flight, all of these things that do make a really big impact on our cellular health, on our mitochondrial health. If our cells don't have all the things that they need to perform properly, even blood sugar dysregulation, is the glucose getting into the cell? Is the signaling correct for the insulin? Or do we have insulin issues where our body's just randomly producing insulin for a variety of reasons? All of this causes a lot of fatigue because our cells don't have the nutrients, the resources, all the things that they need to operate effectively, efficiently, optimally, in which case one of the first signs of chronic issues is fatigue.
Yeah. And are you eating enough food? I don't know if that's something that a regular Western medicine doctor would ask. Probably not in that case. I mean, I cannot tell you how many people we talk to who are barely eating any food. And that's the first change that we make. And we always hear, oh, I'm not tired throughout the day. I actually have sustained energy, when we haven't even done any supplementation, barely. So that's a huge thing alone, is then the over exercising piece. There's so many other questions that need to be asked underlying this chronic fatigue syndrome that are just left out.
Yeah. And, it really is a shame. And I can't remember, there was someone big in the functional medicine space, and I just don't remember who it was, but they did a post recently, I think it was on Instagram, of if your doctor's not asking about your sleep, your nutrition, your movement, your relationships, some of these really basic things that really impact our health, then you're working with a drug dealer because they're just trying to prescribe you meds. And
it's true.
It's true.
It's so true.
They're just what medicine can I give you? And even, I'll say, I've been to a couple physicians who have asked about this. And, I remember I was in probably my early 20s. I went to a physician. I was still having a lot of issues with sleep and insomnia. And I was still on meds, anti-anxiety and antidepressants. And I said, hey, I'm not sleeping. I'm here and I have not slept in 4 days. Can you help me with something? And she says to me, have you tried running? I wanted to punch her straight in the face because I mean, not that I was perfect by any means at that point in time, but I was exercising 3 or 4 days a week. I was eating decently. And I was like, lady, you didn't even ask me, are you doing any sort of movement? What is going on? Just go running. One, my knees and ankles don't feel great when I run. I'm not a big runner. And I am working out multiple days a week. I'm still not sleeping. Can you please help me with something? And then she recommended a supplement, which, looking back now, totally wrong, given the medication that I was on at the time. And it probably would have made me way worse and made the insomnia worse. And I'm just, it's very, very frustrating. We know, because we've been through the system, many systems, and how frustrating this is. And it is true that most physicians, if you get 5 or 10 minutes, you're pretty lucky. They're likely not going to ask you nutrition, sleep, movement. It's just not likely on the table. And that's largely because they are not trained in this. And even I'll say, couple of physicians that I know and have worked with who, quote unquote, know something about nutrition, their nutrition advice was garbage. It doesn't matter what you eat. Just look at your calories. You can have soda. Just the sugar, mind blowing how terrible their nutritional advice was. So it's something to really, just understand going to the physician. And we put these physicians on these big pedestals that, look, they are trained and go through a lot of schooling, yes, And their schooling also does not include many, many, many things.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's just tough. Like, we've both been there when these are supposed to be people that we feel like we can trust, who can help us. But like, then here we are struggling and we're just not getting those answers. And believe me, we know that. It took me a long time to get rid of my medical trauma that's still slightly there, just from being shut down and unheard so many times. So we get it. We know it's frustrating. And I feel like that's truthfully a large reason of why we both do what we do, is because we've been there. We know how it feels. And, one of the major things that I try and do like throughout this role is just make sure I'm listening to people and, taking what they're saying into consideration, because I know they're probably not getting that in a lot of other areas in their life. And that's such a big piece to this, is just like feeling heard and validated. And, I've had people make me feel like I was insane for the things that I was dealing with, or just telling me that it's all in my head when it actually wasn't. So yeah, it's important to find the right people. And I know it can be a struggle, but yeah, keep going. Certainly you can book a consultation with us. And there are other people out there who are willing to listen. And if you're someone who maybe isn't quite ready to like fully go to this side of things yet, I will say a DO, a doctor of an osteopathic doctor, I think that's right. They typically spend a little bit more time with you and will ask you more questions like about your life and your stress levels. I don't know how much about nutrition they know, but they do typically spend a little bit more time with you and are better for like listening and validating you.
Yeah. And I would agree with that by and large. I know I do slam naturopathic doctors quite a bit too. Some of them will talk to you more about some of this stuff as well. However, just from my experience personally and professionally, we work with a lot of people who come from naturopathic doctors. A lot of them symptom manage and are just doing that on a larger scale than physicians and with supplements versus medications. So just something to keep in mind. The other thing I kind of want to mention and talk about here too when it comes to chronic fatigue issues. Once again, we've just seen this a lot, especially with women, in that, a lot of women spend a lot of their life busy all the time, doing everything for everyone else and still, quote unquote, functioning just fine. Big asterisk there, just fine. Yeah. Yeah. And then at some point, it hits them. And even in their healing journey, they're not getting back to the place where they can run off of 5 hours of sleep and work 14 hours and, then spend time with their family and do the cooking and the cleaning and the grocery shopping and caring for the other people and traveling and, not having jet lag and, all of these things. And look, we do need sleep. We aren't meant to be busy 24/7. Women do need more sleep than men. Our bodies are different. We operate differently. In the morning time, men have their testosterone is highest in the morning and they are up and oftentimes like ready to go, versus women, they're like, when I hear like, it takes me like 30 minutes to just kind of wake up and get going, I'm like, yeah, that's pretty normal. That's like how most of us should work. I schedule at least 2 hours in the morning before I start working because I know I need that space and time. And generally speaking, I feel pretty darn good. And I still need that 2-hour block to really like do all the things that I'd like to do to get my movement and meditation and breakfast and, getting ready and showering and just like taking my time with it, all that kind of stuff. And so I think that's also an important acknowledgement that we're not meant to be go, go, go all of the time. And if you are tired after that, yeah, some of that is normal and okay. And we also just generally speaking need time to rest. I really like for me and my schedule to have like one day, oftentimes a Sunday, where I don't have a lot planned, where I don't have to do a lot and I, can spend more time at home and relaxing and, maybe getting ready for the week, but not being super actively busy. And that is so restorative and so helpful that I also want to point this piece out, because I think this piece is also largely missed and also can be challenging to accept.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I mean that's a great point. We have such a hard time as a society, like just slowing down in general, and that is a really big part of this too. That can also make people feel uncomfortable, because when we're slowing down, it's allowing us to like actually feel maybe some things that need to be felt, which can feel uncomfortable. So I think just that process as a whole was a good point to bring up. I mean, yeah, I have a couple people, I won't even go there. I experienced that myself during my healing journey, where I didn't get why I could like essentially couldn't do more, maybe why I felt a little bit more tired, even though I was feeling better. So yeah, that really is a big piece to this, is just realizing that we're not only making physical changes in the body, but we're making these mental changes, these emotional changes as well, to proactively slow down in general. And you will feel more energized when you make that happen.
Yeah, for sure. And also recognizing chronic fatigue is a big deal. It is not in your head. And also recognizing some of our limitations that we should be respectful of just as humans. Once again, particularly women, just because our hormones and our bodies are different, biologically speaking, than men. And yeah, that is
Yeah, it's that acceptance piece that everybody needs to keep working on.
always and forever.
Yeah, seriously. Okay. So yeah, that was chronic fatigue syndrome. And again, like we're going to go through each of these, and we're also going to talk about like not becoming too attached to the diagnosis, because remember, there's always something going on underneath these things. So it's not just that one thing that we want to be focused on. The next one is fibromyalgia. Again, fairly common thing. Joint pain, fatigue. Those are the two big symptoms that stick out to me. Am I missing any? I mean,
Yeah.
I know there's more, but
Yeah, chronic pain, joint pain, muscle pain, usually accompanied by, fatigue issues. You might have some cognitive issues, but usually it's more physical pain, discomfort, inflammation. Maybe you hold on to water a lot, some water retention going on, noticeably, especially like hands, feet, ankles, that kind of places. And usually, they'll rule out arthritis issues, RA, some of the autoimmune stuff. And there may be some autoimmune stuff there, by the way, because there is a spectrum of autoimmunity. And once again, physicians, it's you either have the autoimmune condition or you don't. And in our cases, there's a big spectrum of you can have autoimmunity and you can be low grade, and certain tests may not come up positive, and others will show early signs of autoimmunity. So yeah, fibromyalgia is one of those, like, we've ruled out arthritis, RA, some of these other issues. And so now, all right, well, guess it's fibromyalgia.
yeah. And again, something underneath it. I feel like with this specifically, I've seen mold be a big thing here with fibromyalgia. That's probably the biggest thing that I've seen to cause. Something has to be going on for quite some time in the body for us to get to this point where, like, it hurts to walk, it hurts to lift our arms over our heads, it hurts to get out of bed in the morning. Like, we're pretty past the point at that point. Like, your body is definitely needing some support. There's lots of inflammation going on. Yeah. So, and again, like, there's no specific testing for this. They're going to check off a couple boxes for some other things. But yeah, this is where, when we see this diagnosis, usually in my opinion, I would like to see an OAT test for sure. If someone doesn't have like a good amount of blood work, I definitely would want to see an organic acids test for this.
Yeah, for sure. And I just while we're on the topic, I'm just going to throw this in there. No, it wasn't on our list, but as we're talking about joint pain and, inflammation, we'll also see, especially with mold, Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome, EDS or HEDS. And that we have had many cases. As a personal trainer, I worked with many people who had hypermobility issues, including being diagnosed with Ehlers-Danlos. And Ehlers-Danlos is kind of one of those autoimmunity kind of pieces where, yes, there can be a genetic piece to this, and there also has to be a trigger for it. And that's where I think some of the mistakes kind of come in with a variety of these, where even with IBS, my mom had IBS, my grandmother had IBS, so I obviously have IBS. Well, you guys all got your gut health from the women that you came from. And if the gut health wasn't addressed, you're going to end up in a similar place. And this goes with, and maybe this autoimmunity was a better place to throw this in, but I was just thinking joint pain made me think of it if you have hypermobility issues and there is testing for this, for hypermobility in particular, and then they can run some other tests for Ehlers-Danlos in particular. Even with that, there is an underlying root cause. And I will say it's almost always mold. With Ehlers-Danlos, with the hypermobility stuff, it's almost always mold and everything that comes along with mold. And so just something else to kind of throw in there that can be a hard one to see too. You have, like, you're so mobile and flexible. And, even as a personal trainer, when I started working with kind of chronic illness, chronic issue kind of clients, understanding the different needs of a lot of people, the vast majority of society has mobility issue, has flexibility issues. And if you're on the other side and you're hypermobile and have these issues, that is extremely, extremely painful because you don't have the muscle and bone support oftentimes for the level of mobility and flexibility that you have. And so we actually need to operate in shorter ranges of motion versus trying to extend your ranges of motion, which will hurt if you are on that side. And once again, I think like strengthening, some of that stuff will not always go away. Like all of it, you may have some of that hypermobility kind of stay with you, and it doesn't have to hurt if, once again, we're addressing underlying root causes going on. And there's also, once again, like movement, from a movement perspective, there's also ways to support the body through this to help the body feel better and not be in so much pain. And that transitionary period of getting there can also sometimes be painful, and this kind of goes with both directions. If you're like, I'm in so much pain, my joints hurt, my muscles hurt, all of these things, I don't want to move because it hurts to move. And sometimes movement is one of the best things that you can do in those cases appropriately. Keyword, appropriately.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't want to be doing like some crazy cardio movements and that's something that I feel like this is the type of thing that you do need someone who is skilled in the physical training department of things, because like you said, it has to be a very specific, like minimal way to make sure the body isn't being hurt anymore. So yeah, I'm glad that you threw that one in there because that's also a big one on the list. Another thing that is pretty much always attached with mold from what I've seen is, so it's CIRS is the acronym for it, but chronic inflammation response syndrome. I would say most practitioners, are well aware that this one kind of comes with mold, but if you can actually be quote unquote diagnosed with it. In the way that they do this is there's like a range of, I think it's 13 or more symptoms. And if you have like 7 or 8 out of the 13, you can get diagnosed with this. The problem, yet again, is that there's something bigger going on here. And again, like when we see this, it's mostly attached to mold. And this is another thing. This one really drives me crazy because I've talked with a lot of people who are coming in and maybe they know they have mold, maybe they don't, but they're always leading with like, I just got diagnosed with CIRS. And it's like, everyone is so heavily focused on just that diagnosis that we stop thinking about everything else in the body and we're like, well, how can I get inflammation down? Like I'm gonna take turmeric, I'm gonna take CBD, whatever it may be. While all of those things are great and can help the body, the inflammation is not going to go away until we figure out what the actual root issue is. This is one that drives me a little bit nuts because I just hate hearing it. I'm like, whenever I talk about it with someone, I'm like, all right, hold on. Like, this just means that we need to figure out what the real root issue is here. And it's also not something that you hear about in Western medicine very often. I mean, a couple people have, but not very common to hear about in Western medicine as a diagnosis.
Yeah, and if you do, and even with many quote unquote functional practitioners of a wide variety, oftentimes they will focus on the immune system or the inflammation and try and get those in a better place. And we're missing why and how the body, this inflammation, the immune system, why is this happening in the first place? And this is where the mold piece comes in, where we need to get the mold out of the body. And then we also need to address everything else that comes with the mold out of the body. And then the immune system and the inflammation will start to come down. And sometimes we need to do a little bit of additional work with the immune system or with inflammation. But that's not where we start because that's just a Band-Aid. If we're just focusing on the inflammation, well, the inflammation is a symptom. It's not the root cause here. So yeah, that's a really big thing. I'll also just with SIRS, like oftentimes we may also have like dysautonomia issues like POTS, which once again, this is one of the things that it's always mold.
I was going to say, hey, what do you know? Mold.
Yeah, it's POTS is always mold. And a lot of these dysautonomia issues, whether it's an officially like a POTS diagnosis or just this dysautonomia general category diagnosis, there's a reason. There's a reason that your body is having these issues and symptoms and not being able to hold on to the sodium and electrolytes and, and the hydration piece and all of this kind of stuff. And if, once again, we can give you a prescription, we can, give you these, more intense electrolytes to try and use. And if we don't look at the bigger picture as to, okay, but why is your body responding this way? Because that's not how it's supposed to work. But why is your body doing this? And once again, with SIRS, with POTS, like dysautonomia, it's mold. So we need to address the mold.
And it's pretty hard to go through a POTS diagnosis, isn't it? Like to actually get diagnosed with POTS.
Yeah. So you go have a table tilt test, and that's how you get your official diagnosis. Yeah. Good luck. One of my clients has spent, oh my gosh, I don't even know. 2 or 3 years she has a team of doctors, different cardiologists, different neurologists, all kinds of physicians. She only recently got a table test and they were like, hey, it's kind of inconclusive. So we think you have some dysautonomia, but here's a prescription for something that'll help you retain sodium.
I don't understand why you wouldn't, I'm just thinking about being a doctor and wanting to figure out things and why wouldn't you want to continue with the testing to see what it actually is? But yeah, I just brought that up because I know that is a tough one to actually get diagnosed with. There's plenty of people out there who have it. It's just difficult to get diagnosed with it.
Yeah, and the test itself, the table tilt test is, it's a relatively simple test. It's really hard to get insurance to cover it, which is really where the issues come in, and for someone to actually be willing to order it. And it's probably going to send you into a flare. Unfortunately, I think my client who just did this, it was a week or two of being, most of her symptoms were gone. And then she did the test and everything came back in full force and yeah, miserable. And so, yeah, it's really tough. And, we were talking about this before the call, but, mast cell issues, getting diagnosed officially with testing for mast cell activation syndrome, MCAS, very, very challenging and very painful because you have to go off all of your antihistamines, prescription and non-prescription. You have to go off a lot of the things that support you. And then you have to actively put yourself in an active flare. You have to eat and do things that are going to make you feel really bad so that then you can get the testing done. And then it's probably going to take you days to weeks, for some people months maybe, depending on where they are in their healing journey, to recover from that. And the testing is not perfect, and that's super unfortunate. I mean, even if we talk about Lyme, the testing for Lyme is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, even functional testing. And so we just have to take all of this with a grain of salt. I mean, even any of the testing that we do, we have to take with a grain of salt. Hormone testing, blood testing, that's one moment in time of what our hormones are doing. We do Dutch test, urine or saliva testing, which gives it at least a few hours, if not a whole day, or a couple days, depending on what test you're taking. But, that gives us better information. Is it perfect? No. And this is why we like to look at different things. This is why we start with blood work. And no, blood work's not perfect either. But we can take that with a grain of salt and get some information, couple that with your symptoms. And this is why we also do like full health histories and, do deep dives into all the things that we look into, because all of this matters. And we know testing is not perfect, any of it.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point to bring up too, is that we can't rely on any one test to give us like the most perfect answer and tell us exactly what's going on in our body. It's really a bunch of different pieces that we're using to put together to then figure out what the root cause is. I mean, and it's because our bodies are so easily thrown off balance. Like maybe we had a stressful event happen like a couple days before we were going to get blood work done. Guess what? It's going to probably mess with some of your markers on the blood tests, and there's nothing that we can do about it at that point. So, but then hopefully, the point of having a conversation and talking about that and me asking questions, if you tell me that, then I'm going to know that it probably had an impact on your blood work a little bit. Yeah, and then certainly going into the mast cells, just because you were talking about it already, this is probably another one that insurance might struggle to cover. You have to be seeing either like an allergist or an immunologist. We were just talking about this. I'm sure potentially like a GI doctor, because a way to diagnose this is doing a biopsy of the GI, which is very, very, very rare. It's not something that happens a lot. So this just isn't a very common test. And again, when we see mast cell issues, mostly with mold is when we see them. There's been a handful of times where I've seen them with some pretty deep, like heavy metal toxicities, but the majority of the time we're seeing this happen when there's also mold present in the body, which would be the root issue.
Exactly. Yeah. And I wouldn't even say heavy metal. I'd say just overall toxin load is crazy high. We have a particular client that I'm sure we're both thinking of who we both thought it was mold. We ran an organic acid test. It wasn't mold, but her toxin load in overall was crazy. And just like with her job and level of exposure to all kinds of chemicals and different solutions and all that kind of stuff. She was at a rough spot, and we were like, it has to be mold, and it wasn't. And this is why we run the testing. So mast cell is really tough, and it's really tough, and you can have a lot of flares, and parasites also play a big role in this too, because of the histamine issues and hormone disrupting that parasites do. So that's a big thing too.
Yeah. And I think too, like this, it's very easy to get this confused or, comparing it to histamine issues, just because they can really present themselves in similar ways when it comes to like maybe rashes or hives, sinus issues, inflammation, chronic pain, fatigue, headaches. Like there's so many things that can overlap with what we experience with like a histamine issue as well. But again, like, that's the point of doing the testing, is because we need to actually see what's going on. And once we dig deeper into it, it's pretty easy to tell the difference between the two.
Yeah, exactly. Totally agree.
Yeah. And then that was really, any other ones that you're thinking of?
I always like to touch on just blanket autoimmunity real quick in that, and obviously we can get diagnosed. It's a struggle oftentimes for many of us to get diagnosed with an autoimmune condition. And not that we want that, but, you know, you can go through blood testing. You know, oftentimes if there's a lot of inflammation, you have maybe some classic signs, depending on kind of where they're thinking, you know, an ANA is really common to run. You know, if you think about thyroid, you know, typically they'll run TPO, TG antibodies. If you're hyperthyroid, it's hard to get a TSI run, but that's the best. And that's one way to get diagnosed with Graves versus more of like Hashimoto's kind of thing. You know, we have all of these different autoimmunity, obviously the gut, all kinds of gut kind of autoimmune conditions. And, you know, once again, I was diagnosed, and you'll see me talk about it in different ways. You know, I was diagnosed, or I have a history of autoimmunity. So I still don't quite know how to talk about it because I don't resonate with the diagnosis of, I have had whatever Hashimoto's or a thyroid autoimmunity. You know, I just don't resonate with that. And at the time, though, I was like, okay, this is it. I have Hashimoto's, like, I have this autoimmune condition, like, this is the answer to all my problems. And, you know, going on meds, this will do it, or supplementation. And one thing that's really important to understand about autoimmune conditions that, once again, like Western medicine doesn't see it this way, and even some people in the functional medicine space, I think, blurry on how this works. But, you know, if you are diagnosed with an autoimmune condition, this really means that your immune system is responding to something, keyword, something, I'm going to come back to that, and then it's attacking itself. And it's not, you know, for me, like with my thyroid, like it wasn't a thyroid issue that I had. While I was first diagnosed hypothyroid, and I had a lot of the symptoms with that. And then later got diagnosed when someone actually ran proper testing with Hashimoto's. It's still not a thyroid issue. And for most people go on specific medications for whatever is being attacked. And it's really not about that. And some people will go on prednisone, you know, to just like dampen the immune system, or, you know, the high dose vitamin D because you're, you know, and that makes you feel better. And then you go off of that and then you feel like garbage. And that it's really important to understand it's your immune system. That's really the issue. And the question is, what is that something that your immune system is responding to? And if we address the something, then the immune system no longer responds that way and will stop attacking whatever it's attacking. Now, depending on when you got diagnosed, you know, how bad things were, like, yeah, sometimes you do have to remain on meds because there was enough damage done. This is not the case for everyone. It is the case for some people, and it's a real case-by-case basis. You know, who can come off of meds and who cannot, or who needs to go on meds. You know, once again, there's a range of autoimmunity, and doctors are not trained to do anything until you are full, quote unquote, full-blown, far end of the spectrum diagnosed autoimmunity. However, we catch autoimmune issues quite regularly, but early stage, because there are a lot of early signs. There's a lot of testing and patterns that we can look at that show early stage autoimmunity. But I think it's really important to understand that autoimmunity issues it's not just your genetics. Yes, there is a genetic component to it, and there's got to be a trigger for it. And I can guarantee anyone who has been diagnosed with an autoimmune condition, if you think really hard back to when like things started to get a lot worse, there was something that happened in your life. You got sick, there was an event, there was a stressful situation. Something happened that really triggered this continuation, you know, this kind of like the worsening of the autoimmune piece of this. So it's really important to understand that piece of it. But we have to address the something, the how and the why. Why is the immune system responding this way? And then that's the biggest piece, because whatever it's attacking, it's not about that piece of it. While yes, we may need to symptom manage that for a bit with medications, with supplements, with whatever it is, we need to look at the immune system first and foremost, and why the immune system's responding the way it is.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Very, very full circle here when we started saying that this is all about finding the root issue and what is going on internally in the body. Yeah, I mean, it's a shame that not everyone views autoimmunity as a spectrum, because so many people could be helped if we were open to seeing that, hey, like, it doesn't have to be a full-blown issue. It actually starts over here, and there was something that triggered it. I think that's like, in even not with autoimmunity issues, like even if you're dealing with mold illness, maybe like you have a virus of some sort, usually, not always, but usually, like some sort of stressful event can be happening in your life. Like a car accident. I know that was what happened with you. I mean, a divorce. Usually when you actually talk to people and try and figure out, hey, what's the timeline? Like, what was going on in your life around this time? Usually there's going to be some sort of big event where things started to get really worse after that. And it's because there always is a trigger. And then there's always those co-infections or something else going on underneath it as well.
Exactly. So yeah, it's just really important. And this is why we, on our consults, if you've ever talked to us, when did your symptoms start? What was going on? Did you move? Was there an accident? Was there a death? Was what, changed jobs? Like what was kind of going on around that time? Because it is really helpful to understand what the trigger was, and knowing that it was probably some sort of stressor. Did you get really sick? Like, what was going on that really started to fuel the fire of all of your issues? One of the last things I really just want to touch on again here is being tied to these diagnoses. And once again, I did fall into this trap for a period of time of, okay, I have Hashimoto's. Like, this is it. I have autoimmune issues. Like, this is the thing. And this is just something I'm going to have to deal with. And that's not the case. And I see, and it makes me sad sometimes to see people go through like, big healing journeys and still be like, okay, well, I still have chronic fatigue syndrome. I still have fibromyalgia. I still have IBS. I still have, kind of. And autoimmunity is a little bit different because you can, I mean, a little bit, because you certainly can still have flares. And some people, once again, like, do you need to stay on meds? But there's also, we need to understand our nervous system, and our brain plays a really big role here. And the more you focus and fixate on, I have this thing, I am this, you will, whatever it is. And our brain just has a lot of power, like a power of our mind. And if you look at a lot of the research around this, if you read, books, we think like law of attraction, and the way you think, if we want to go like a little more woo of like spirituality, of like manifestation, what you think will happen. Yeah, it will. And so if you keep connecting, and IBS is one that I feel like sticks out to me quite a bit of, okay, well, I have IBS, and so I just always have to be on the lookout for flares. Well, guess what? You're going to have flares, because you're going to manifest that within your body, whether doesn't really matter what's happening. And so it's really important to understand that, one of the big reasons that we focus on nervous system regulation so much is that this plays a really big role long-term in our overall health. And even, and I know I've shared this before, but the more and more I regulate my nervous system, the more work that I do around this, all of the decisions I've made this year in my life and all of the big changes. I mean, I haven't done a lot of physical work this year, supplementations, protocols, I've done little things here and there, and I feel better than ever. And even some remaining like gut issues, like occasional bloating that was there, like, can't tell you the last time I felt bloated. I mean, it's been a minute, like, to the fact that I can't remember, which is pretty crazy. And so this stuff really does matter. And chronic stress, whether that's like external stress, internal stress of the dysregulated nervous system, this plays such a big role just in your overall long-term health. And I would just caution anyone who has received one of these diagnoses, just to be mindful that it doesn't have to be a forever thing. It can be, and if you let it, it can define you, and it doesn't have to. And it's really your choice on that.
Yeah, and that goes, I mean, with any of these, even with like mold too, you know, literally any of the stuff that we're dealing with. I think it's tough because, like, thinking of my own experience, I mean, I had felt awful literally since I was like 10 years old into my late 20s, essentially. Like, it took me a really long time to heal. And at that point, my brain was so used to thinking like, oh, this is my normal, this is me. So it's like you just become like mesh with it. And you think even though there is progress happening, like you still just attach yourself to that. And that's where that piece of like the nervous system work, the brain rewiring, there's something called Psych K that can be really, really helpful for brain rewiring and kind of like detaching yourself, changing the way you think, separating yourself from what's going on. That piece is, I would be willing to bet that it's almost necessary to do something like that when you've struggled with whatever it is for a long period of time. You almost have to do some brain rewiring to help yourself get out of it. I mean, I've seen it with myself. I've seen it with so many clients. And sometimes that can actually be the missing piece when it comes to like the end of your program. You're feeling better physically, but you still have that mental piece that just hasn't shifted yet. It's really common just to need to do some extra work around that area so you can fully detach yourself from it.
Exactly. And I mean, I'm such a big proponent of brain retraining, brain rewiring, because it's been so fundamental for my own healing journey, for just my life overall, and creating this life that I love. And that's been a huge, huge piece for me. And our other practitioner, if you haven't listened to our episode with Brendan, she does Psych K, and she, focuses around a lot of this as well. And work that she'll do with our clients here in the practice. And it's so important, because when you've been sick for so long, and even, for most of us, probably listening, and I definitely know both of us, that you're crazy, and that it's, all of these symptoms, oh, you just have depression, oh, you just have anxiety. Like, it's just your hormones being crazy, like, whatever it is. It's probably not. And it's also really important to do with that brain work to make sure that, these things that have been ingrained in our brains that we've been told for so long, like, you're going to be sick forever. Like, you're always just going to feel this way. Like, this is how it is. You're crazy. You just have anxiety. You just have depression. Like, this is, you have a family history of this. Like, this is just how it's going to be. That doesn't have to be the case. And that doesn't have to be your story if you don't want it to be. And a lot of that goes back to what is our default programming that we're running in our brain, and how do we need to make some shifts, and what do we want our default programming to be, and understanding that is also a fast process. That takes time. If you've been running the same pattern and program for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, a month of work isn't going to do it. It's probably going to take a couple of years to really start to get out of these patterns. And, just like all kind of trauma healing nervous system work, it's layers. And it's, you can do one round of layering, and that helps a lot. And then at some point, you're probably going to have another layer that comes up that's going to need to be worked through. And this is just kind of how it works. And being aware of that and being able to ride the waves of that, and having tools and resources to be able to ride those waves, goes a really, really long way. So that, if and when you do have a flare, you're not spiraling, which is where many of us can land.
Yeah, and it's hard not to go there, which again, that's the point of, we can't leave this nervous system piece out. Like, it's such a huge piece of this work, and it's not a quick and easy fix. Yes, going through the supplements can sometimes feel really hard, especially if we're having detox symptoms and whatnot. But the emotional side of things, like, it is tough. It's not really easy work. It's actually pretty tough work. and it does just take a long time. So you have to be, no one can do the work for you, only you can do it. And yes, you can have other people helping you throughout the process. Absolutely. Something like EMDR therapy, is really, really great, especially if we have some underlying like trauma stuff going on. And just, again, like helping change our brain patterns, rewiring it. Maybe we grew up a certain way that affected us in a negative way. We can change those things. It's just very possible, but not a quick fix.
Exactly. So I think that's a good place to wrap up here. We hope you enjoyed this. If you have questions, obviously feel free to reach out. Once again, if you've been diagnosed with any of these things or anything else, we do offer free consults. We'll be more than happy to chat with you, to look at any labs that you've already had run. If you want recommendations on labs to run, we can walk you through that as well. So it's always in the show notes, or depending on where you're listening or watching this, either in the show notes or down below. There's always an option to do that. And you can always check out our social media. It's always in the link in our bio. So lots of good options there. Once again, thank you for listening. Like, follow, subscribe. If it resonates, 5-star review means a lot to us. Really, really, it does. We really appreciate all the reviews that have already been left. So we really appreciate it. And be sure to stay tuned to our new episode next week.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everyone. We'll see you next time.